So this week, Mike, I've been flexing my creative muscles.
Oh, no.
Which I do have. You'll be pleased to know. I've been trying to design a logo for a new Everything in Moderation series about the trust and safety jobs industry. I'll include a link to the show notes, but there's lots of cool stuff that Alice Hunsberger and I have been coming up with. And I went to Canva to do this, well-known design tool. And Canva now has an AI function that allows you to kind of write what you want, describe what you want to create, and it does it for you. And I thought the prompt was a great opening for us today in Ctrl-Alt-Speech. So I pose to you the Canva prompt, which is describe your idea and I'll bring it to life.
Oh my goodness.
Don't be held back. Let your imagination run wild.
Well, as you know, I've done a bit of vibe coding myself, and I'm working on a project right now, which I'm not ready to talk about, so I'm not going to do that. But I like this idea of like human vibe coding. If I describe my idea, and Ben will bring it to life. Okay. This one I didn't prepare ahead of time. Normally, some of these prompts, so this one is just on the fly. I'm going to say, I would like for you to make it so that when people like Elon Musk talk about content moderation and trust and safety and free speech, they actually have some clue as to what it is that they're talking about. Can you bring that to life, Ben?
That's actually one step too far for me. And for any AI tool, I think. Yeah, I mean, I would say...
What a disappointment.
Sorry, so soon in the episode as well. I would probably say, similar to you, that I would imagine a world, I would like for a world in which grifters and charlatans and assholes don't control some of the world's biggest platforms or have millions of followers that they can kind of manipulate others to their will. I'm not asking a lot, Mike. I'm really not asking a lot.
Well, let's bring it to life.
Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, your weekly roundup of the major stories about online speech, content moderation, and internet regulation. It's November the 6th, 2025, and this week's episode is brought to you in partnership with Safer by Thorn, a purpose-built CSAM and child sexual exploitation solution powered by trusted data and Thorn's issue expertise. Safer helps trust and safety teams proactively detect CSAM and child sexual exploitation messages. This week, we're talking about why you'll never stop kids from chatting to their friends, Twitter's involvement in last year's UK riots, and academic slop. My name is Ben Whitelaw. I'm the founder and editor of Everything in Moderation, and I'm with Mike Masnick, who is not only experienced and knowledgeable, but he has a lot of online followers and therefore is not very cool.
I am so uncool.
You're so uncool. I am, of course, referring to this new New Yorker piece, Mike, that we both read this week, and which we'll include in the show notes, about how the number of followers you have is no longer a sign of your relevance and clout. And as somebody who has quite a lot of Blue Sky followers, this is bad news for you.
Yeah, I'm done. I mean, this presumes that there was ever any point when I was cool. Okay. I mean,
in some corners of the internet.
Yeah, I don't know. I did like this piece. It was kind of fun. Just talking about like it's becoming cool to use social media in a more narrowly focused way. And I actually like that idea. Actually, on the Tech Nerd podcast this week, I had Corbin Barthold on as a guest, and we just kind of had this discussion about like how social media is changing. And part of it was that it's not all about just influencers and everything. And people are sort of looking for different kinds of meaning, different kinds of conversations in different parts of the internet. And we all shouldn't have the same experience. And I think this New Yorker piece was a little bit of that same thing but the title is great, that it's cool to have no followers now. So,
which is great news for me, I would say, because I have
have followers.
I have a modest 5,500 followers compared to your, let me just check, latest, livest number, 195,800 followers.
I know, I can't get over 200K though.
Have you reached a plateau?
I'm stuck at this. I've been right around, 190 to 195 for quite some time.
This is not something we were going to talk about, but I think I might have the reason why. Do you want me to tell you?
You go for it.
When you search Mike in the search bar of Blue Sky, at least for me, You are not the first, not the second, not even the third mic to come up.
What?
In the search. You are the fourth mic to come up. And that is somebody who I engage with a lot, I have a podcast with. Maybe, obviously you're on the board of Blue Sky. Ding, ding, ding.
I need to.
Could you sort that out?
I need to put my thumb on the scale and make sure when people are searching Mike that I am at the top.
Exactly. That's what I'm suggesting.
That feels like a very Elon style move. And that is not my nature.
Yeah, it isn't. No, but it is appropriate for today's episode, I would say. I'll leave you with that.
All right.
Speak to the powers that be at Blue Sky. Well, talking of kind of other wins for me this week, we actually got a really nice review, Mike.
On Blue Sky.
On Blue Sky, bringing together two worlds there, which I want to read out and just get your kind of reaction to. It's quite long. It's from an anonymous user. So I'll just read it out. It says, I source my podcast anonymously, so I need to write my review on Blue Sky. I love Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Ben is great. Mike's good too.
I love it.
It's kind of like come for Ben, stay for the Mike, whom I once publicly addressed as Mick, apparently. That's bad news for you again.
I'm so memorable.
Maybe
if you search for Mick, I would come up earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'm spelling it wrong. Anyway, he goes on to say, we hear time and time again about the dangers of social media and the internet, and they're very easy. I know it when I see it. It's obviously a no-brainer solutions that everyone has thought about that take, whole minutes to come up with. The thing is, there are others who have spent literally years researching and writing about these problems, and you can debunk all of those easy solutions while asleep. Mike Masnick and Ben Whitelott are just two of them, and their discussions on Ctrl-Alt-Speech are informative, thoughtful, and nuanced. Always nuanced, like the show could be called Ctrl-Alt-Nuance, which I think is a good gag. And it goes on to kind of say, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So first of all, thank you to this user for the review at all. Thank you for suggesting that I contribute more to this podcast than Mike Masnick, when we all know that that's not true.
It is a 50-50 partnership, Ben.
I'm here for it anyway. And again, great to have reviews. Very happy to take them on Blue Sky if you want to stay anonymous, but also please do go to your podcast platform of choice, listeners, and leave a rating review so we can be discovered and reach more listeners like yourself. We have a lot to get through today, not least because, Mike, we have a great bonus chat with Thorn's Paylez Halai about the positive application of AI to detect child sexual abuse material at scale, and also why safety by design principles matter more than ever. So we will go to that at the end of today's podcast. For now, we're going to jet set to Australia for our first story today, where we have a bit of an update on a kind of big story that's approaching like a juggernaut, I would say, Mike. The December the 10th deadline for the teen social media ban is hurtling towards us. We've talked about it on the podcast before. And there's a bit of an update this week, which you found interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as we get closer and closer to the social media ban for those under 16, they keep expanding what is included. And, a couple of months ago, they added YouTube to the list, which I thought was kind of crazy because YouTube, for many kids, is effectively TV. And I couldn't imagine just like an out-and-out ban on TV for kids. Like, you can have limits and things like that, but not a ban. But now they've added both Reddit and Kick to the social media ban as well. And it's basically more and more places that kids go are going to get blocked from anyone under 16 in Australia. And I find this to be somewhat silly. Kick, I can somewhat understand just because there have been some discussions about the lack of effective trust and safety efforts on that platform, you could say. And it is popular among children. And so I sort of understand where that is coming from. Reddit, to me, just seems like, again, this kind of overkill situation. There is lots of really, really useful information on Reddit. And the nature of Reddit is that you have all these subreddits and subcommunities, and some of them, I imagine, are really useful for many kids for a lot of reasons. And the idea of a blanket ban for all kids from Reddit just seems crazy, and just seems like a complete there are tools within Reddit, like every subreddit has their own moderation tools, and you have things where they can put restrictions on it if there are concerns about, like, I mean, already, I believe, I'm not a big Reddit user, I should say, but like there are forums on Reddit that are not safe for work and that have restrictions for, I think it's for over 18. I came across that when we were looking at, or I don't even remember if we talked about the story about Grok generating not safe for work images. And there was a discussion on Reddit, and I had to show that I was over 18 just to go to that subreddit. So there are tools and ways to do it, and it should be on a community by community basis rather than doing a blanket ban. Yeah. And it strikes me as just another of these things where for years people have complained about the fact that kids have fewer and fewer places, third spaces, places that they can go that are not school and are not home, where they can spend time with each other and hang out and interact, where they're not being watched by parents or teachers. Yeah. And it used to be the mall or the park or whatever, but there's been like such a fear of like letting kids be kids that we sort of don't allow that as much anymore. And there have been lots of efforts to try and bring that back, but it hasn't really been coming out. And that's why I think so many kids end up going to social media, because it is kind of a third space. And maybe it's not the best. Maybe it would be better if there were more physical spaces that people could go to. And so this just strikes me as another, kids are going to these places because they want to communicate and they want to spend time with each other. And just completely blocking it just seems so silly, which leads me to a story that I wrote this week, which I think sort of gets included with this. You're going to interrupt here?
Well, I wanted to kind of just point out the kind of difficulties of preventing under 16s access to Reddit everywhere, because I was thinking about how Reddit is increasingly showing up in Google search results.
Yes.
It ranks really well because of the kind of authority of the information on Reddit. So you don't even have to go kind of halfway down the page on a lot of search engine result pages to see a Reddit link or a link to a subreddit. And I wonder how Google is also going to manage this process for under 16 users, if this is to be blanket, as I'm sure the eSafety Commission would like.
Yeah, well, I think it's even crazier than that, because like a lot of people now will go to Google and specifically search Reddit because they know. And in fact, like Google added, I was trying to find it really quickly, like they added a feature that basically searches through Reddit. If you do the web search, which it looks at places where you're likely to get more information, like Reddit, YouTube, Yelp. Whenever I'm in the middle of trying to fix some home appliances and the combination of Reddit and YouTube are basically like the answers to everything. So people now like go and add site reddit.com to their Google searches, and Google actually added this web search thing which specifically looks on Reddit. And then to block that entirely from kids, just it seems like such overkill.
Yeah, there might be like hundreds of thousands of kids who've been like searching of how to do household chores or fix their bike that no longer will be able to do so in Australia because of this ban. There might be a kind of plague of rusty bikes.
Yeah, I mean,
whatever else kids do.
I'm assuming it's more like how to build something in Minecraft or like things also like that kids are using. But like there's a lot of really useful information on Reddit. And honestly, like I actually think Reddit is kind of a useful tool for, something that I talk about a lot, which is sort of the media literacy thing, right? Like learning what is good and bad information. And I find going through Reddit threads to be really useful for that, because you have like a whole discussion on whatever topic you're looking at. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's very useful. Like we're working on a project which is not announced yet, so I can't even talk about it yet. But I was looking for recommendations for like a vendor that could help us do something. And Reddit was incredible because there were multiple discussions on this and back and forth. And it's like why this particular vendor is good and why that one is not so good. And it got into like nuances of like why different people are good for different things. Right. And it's incredible how much you can get into nuance here on Ctrl-Alt-Nuance from like a discussion on Reddit. And it just seems like such a weird thing to just say we're going to ban it entirely for everyone under 16. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, this is what critics take umbrage with about the law generally, right? Which we had talked about this time last year, which was had a year to come into play, and they keep adding platforms, and the justification I'm sure there is some for it, but the justification feels a bit weak. You were going to talk about the kind of workaround or
Yes.
how kids can be clever in doing this. Like, do you want to talk about the post you wrote on Take That this week?
Yeah. So I think there are a few different things. So part of it is just like, people always joke about like kids will find a way, and kids will find a way around almost anything. And so I had just randomly heard a podcast that revealed one example of it, and it reminded me of another one. So I wrote this piece that first talks about a story from 2019, so going way back, about how kids in schools were turning Google Docs into like their own private social media network, which I just thought was fascinating. And because a lot of schools use Google Docs as, you do all your assignments there and project announcements are there. And so what the kids were doing was they would take an official document from a teacher, like, here's your assignment, and they were making a duplicate of it, which is something you can do in Google Docs, and then using the comment feature. So if anyone like came and looked over their shoulder, it looked like they were looking at the assignment page or the scoring rubric or whatever it was, and they were just commenting on it, and you can comment on it, no problem. But like, they were using that to have the communication sort of hide their communication.
Genius.
And then if it ever got to the point where somebody was looking closely, you can just click and resolve, and it just goes away. And It's just like, oh, these kids are amazing, right? They're like figuring out ways. And so the story that I heard that was new this week, and I heard it on an NPR podcast where they were interviewing someone who's like social media manager for a different NPR podcast, the TED Radio Hour. And she was saying one of her jobs is to monitor the comments on Spotify. And all of a sudden, she was seeing like a rash of comments on a podcast from years ago. She talked about one from 2022, but there were a few of these. And there were all these comments that were like weirdly out of context. They certainly had nothing to do with the actual podcast itself. And there was clearly some other discussion that had occurred beforehand, because a lot of them, they were very kid speak. And a lot of it was like, you're so pretty. Oh, don't listen to them. Don't believe that. You're so pretty. Like, that was the discussion.
Right.
And so she was investigating, and she said that she was talking to some of the other social media managers, and they were seeing a similar thing on a bunch of other NPR podcasts.
Right.
That old podcasts would suddenly, for a day, be flooded with, between 20 and 50 comments. I think there was one that was like 90 comments. And what they were assuming, and it was all sort of kids, it was clearly kids, and they were all clearly not referencing the podcast, but they were talking about something else. And what she believed was that it was probably a group of school kids or a group of friends somewhere who had put together a playlist of podcasts, because they could probably access Spotify for podcasts at school.
Wow.
And NPR podcasts are, that's upstanding. There's nothing wrong with that. You're listening to the TED Radio Hour. You're getting educated and stuff. Nobody's going to be checking the comments from a random episode from 2022 on leadership, which was the one that I saw.
Yeah.
And so they believe that they were putting together a playlist that was basically like, each day, this is where our conversation is. No adult is ever going to find it. No one is ever going to realize. And it's just this recognition that kids want to communicate. Like, the reason kids are using these services is because they do want to communicate, and they do want to share, and they do want to talk to people, and they do want to experience culture. And if you block them, it's getting back to that discussion I was having about third spaces. They're going to find the third spaces.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're not going to be as prepared for it, as well guarded, or you don't have trust and safety watching the Spotify comments on TED Radio Hour. Maybe you have an NPR social media manager who's like looking at it, but you're sort of driving them into these other spaces. They're going to find a way. And there's an element of like, that's cool, and it's kind of funny, and it's an interesting cultural moment. But like, wouldn't it be better if we just like took the spaces that we had and tried to make them better, rather than just saying like outright ban on kids?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I love situations like this where a group of users are being innovative and determined and motivated. Yep. Can you even imagine what the teacher would have been thinking? Like, little Jimmy's getting genned up on leadership so he can go into the corporate world.
Exactly.
Like, poor teacher. And so I love this story. I suppose like people might say, well, there are apps designed for kids or for teenagers. We featured some of them. We've talked about some of them. And they don't often do a good job of ensuring that people can communicate in the way that they want to. So it begs the question, like, is it actually achievable for young people to communicate in ways that aren't underneath NPR podcast. It's all well and good that this kind of probably one class in the States has managed to do this, but it doesn't seem to work at scale, does it?
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, this is the nature of communities. And we're sort of learning to some extent. For a while, we had this period of time where it felt like the belief was that there should be one giant community, the one giant chat room that everybody's in. And more people realize, like, maybe that's not great. And maybe having smaller, targeted, narrower communities is actually better and beneficial. And it's why you have so many chat groups that are just like a small group of people there are no outsiders in there. Or you have, Discord groups or whatever. You have more and more of that showing up, and you have more things that are more community driven. I mean, even Reddit is an example of that, right? I mean, It's all based on building a whole bunch of different communities. And so I think that that's an element of society reacting to this period of time where we thought everything was like one giant shared chat room. And then this realization, like, maybe that's good for certain purposes, but we should also have more private, more condensed spaces where communities can grow. And I think that's just a natural thing that happens. People want community. You want to have culture. You want to share it with other people.
Yeah.
And so that is going to happen. And this focus on banning, I just feel is not a good way to do it. But like, I think once you get past the idea of just banning, then you can have a much better conversation about how do we build good, safe places for different communities, and not just for kids, but certainly for kids, but also for other people too, right? I mean, you keep hearing all these stories of like the loneliness epidemic. What was the book Bowling Alone, right? Like there are all these things about loneliness and people not communicating with each other at a time when we have tools for all sorts of community and getting together and all this stuff. And yet I think we've sort of overreacted to like, well, there are some bad things that happen and therefore we have to like stomp out the badness rather than focusing on like, how do we make the good parts better?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think these kind of stories bring to light the need for certainly kind of children to have these spaces and how often they can be kind of left out of the conversation about what that looks like, which is probably not one we can get into today, but it is definitely important. I'm going to move us on now to a platform that the E-Safety Commission has listed in one of its 9 platforms that are not allowed for under 16s as part of the ban in a month's time, X/Twitter. How I always refer to it. I will never refer to it purely as X. This is, I think, an interesting story. I don't think many folks would have heard about this, Mike. Some of our listeners are based in the UK, but you have to be pretty in the weeds of UK politics to be doing what I did today, which is listen to and watch 3 hours of testimony from X/Twitter's global head of global affairs, a woman called Diana Romina Kanonishko, who I'd never heard of before today's testimony. At the moment, there's a big inquiry happening in the UK called the Southport Inquiry in response to a story we talked about on the podcast last year, the UK riots that happened in Southport after a young man, a 17-year-old called Axel Rudis-Cabana, stabbed and killed 3 young children at a Taylor Swift dance class in Southport near Liverpool in July last year. It led to a series of riots after people online kind of misidentified Rudis-Cabana and believed he was somebody else. And that misinformation spiral caused days and days and days of violence, police aggression, and really became a big political story. Listeners from back last year will remember. This inquiry has kind of gone into the detail about why that happened, what was the causes of those riots. And as part of it, they called Kanonishko in for testimony, and that happened earlier this week. For me, having watched it all today, the appearance is kind of like a really good, clear example of what free speech and online safety means to X and Elon Musk. And we've talked about it, obviously, at length, and we talk about Musk's comments, but she is probably one of the most senior staff members responsible for policy in the company. And so I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit about what she said and get your thoughts. It's worth saying this is a long testimony, so if you get a chance, go and listen. I'm not going to cover all of it. And also to say that this event obviously happened last year before the Online Safety Act came into play and the child safety duties came into play. So Twitter didn't actually have to do anything in terms of preventing 17-year-olds like Rudis-Cabana from doing anything more than enter a birthday. And that was a big topic of conversation. So a couple of things that stood out for me. First of all, it's the fact that the team at Twitter, we know there's been lots of trust and safety cuts. Do you want to guess, Mike, how many people there are in the public policy team at Twitter right now for its 600 million global users?
I'm afraid to guess, and I would put the number probably under 5, but
I was a bit surprised as well.
Okay.
There's 15 people. I was surprised that it wasn't, 3 people and their dog. But then also, there's probably 15 people working for Meta in public policy in London alone or in Washington alone.
Yeah.
So it gives you a sense of, how those cuts have affected parts of the company more than others. And so she kind of makes that clear in the start in some of her comments. She outlines X/Twitter's mission when it comes to speech as well. She talks about the importance of truth-seeking and the kind of uncomfortableness of speech sometimes. And she says that free speech is the only way that humanity moves forwards, which is straight out of kind of the Elon Musk podcast episode, I think. So there's a lot of, I guess, posturing about that. She's asked about age verification. The kind of interesting point about Rudy Cabana is that he searched for a video of a bishop who was stabbed in Australia last year. Again, this is a story we talked about, so it brings together a few different threads that we've already discussed. He searched for the video on Twitter. It was a violent stabbing in which Bishop Mari Emanuel was attacked. He wasn't killed, but the video remained up for reasons that we'll kind of go on to. And Rudy Cabana searched for it 6 minutes before ordering a taxi to go to the event where he stabbed these young children. So the inquiry today was talking about whether Twitter felt responsible or what it could have done to avoid that happening. And you can imagine that she was kind of distancing herself from that, making it clear that there's no necessary causal link. Just because it happened doesn't mean that Twitter/X is responsible. She also mentioned that there was only about 198,000 Twitter users, X users, under 18 on the platform, which again is a small number in 600 million. It's also not very robust because users can select any date of birth that they want. But the kind of point she made around age verification and the downsides of it, the privacy concerns that can emerge if you get everyone to upload their IDs, was a kind of sensible part of, I thought, the deposition and what she said. Less so was what she said about the Sydney attack, in my opinion. So you remember that Twitter/X resisted the takedown of the content globally. So the eSafety Commission, Australia's regulator, took Twitter to court about taking this content down globally. Twitter pushed back in many people's eyes for good reason. And so the questions were about, do you think this piece of content violates your policy on graphic content and gory content? And there was some lines read out from that policy. If you've seen the video, you'll know that it probably does in many people's reading of the policy. But she made great pains to say that actually, it didn't do so. The knife wasn't visible. It wasn't glorifying. There was kind of newsworthy protections. And it goes to show the kind of nuances and difficulties that come in making calls about whether a piece of content fits a policy. It's worth noting that Meta and Google and TikTok and others did take copies of the video down for reasons, obviously, that they felt because of their policies maybe being slightly different to Twitter's. Anyway, the point is some sensible things were said about age verification, I would say. Some kind of, swerving of the responsibility was made around maybe why the Bishop Mari attack video was not taken down. And it felt like a bit of a doubling down, really, on that decision because so much was made of it at the time. But again, fascinating insight into several stories, Mike, that we've talked about on the podcast over the last year.
Yeah, and there are a few interesting things to talk about here. So one, you mentioned you watched the entire video and suggested other people could do that. I was unable to watch it. And as of right now, at this moment, I think no one is able to watch it because you sent me the link before we were recording today, and I went and checked it out, and that video is gone. It is set to private on the account of the Southport Inquiry. We have no idea why. We could speculate, but the video that you got to watch something that is secret and no one else can see it. We suspect maybe it'll come back in a redacted state. We're assuming that maybe there was something included in that testimony that shouldn't have been or whatever. So I could not see it. I heard your report on it, and there is an article in The Independent, which seems to cover most of it that I did think was very interesting. But I think you're right that this is interesting in that it actually does display the real complexities here. And the Bishop attack in particular in Australia was a challenging situation. And I understand why many platforms took it down and they say it's a violent attack. And you have, a lot of platforms, especially since the shooting in Christchurch years back, have decided that any of these kinds of attacks they're going to take down. And she made the case that she views that content differently. And in fact, that the bishop has said that wants the video to be out there and that he forgave the person who stabbed him, and even apparently while he was being stabbed said that he forgave him. And so she was saying that she sort of viewed it as a kind of miracle and inspiring in some way. And what that gets to is how much context really matters. And this is something that I think gets lost in so many of the content moderation debates, where for some people it's an inspiration to an attack. And with Rudakabana, it appears that that was the way that he viewed it. And for somebody else, it may be viewed as inspirational in some ways. And we've had this discussion going back a decade and a half, where we talked about the demands to take down terrorist content on YouTube, where the exact same content that was being used and described as terrorist content was also being used by human rights groups to document war crimes and atrocities. And the context matters, but it can be the exact same video that is viewed in different ways. And then there's a question of how do you deal with that from a trust and safety standpoint? And there is no easy answer. And so as much as I criticize X, and I think a lot of what they say is self-serving nonsense and not really connected to free speech, and they wrap this sort of cloak of free speech around it, which I think is obnoxious and often wrong, I actually do feel like she's right about some of this, that this is complex. And the idea, and it's easy for politicians and certainly the media to come in afterwards and say like, well, clearly this guy, he watched this video and then he went and he killed kids. The video is the problem. Why did you take down the video? It's entirely your fault. And, I don't buy that, right? Like if this person was obviously very disturbed, wanted a reason to go and do some horrific act, he was going to find a reason. The fact that this video was or was not available on this one platform, I don't think was going to change the situation. And I think it's a little bit ridiculous to say like, oh, it's somehow this platform's fault because they didn't take down this one video from Australia.
Yeah. I mean, the only point I make there, which I don't think was made very strongly in the testimony by the kind of government legal representative, was the fact that he searched for the video. I feel like there's something more causal about it. If you search for the video, it's not like he just watched it in his feed and then went out and did it.
To me, that almost goes the other way, right? Where it's like he was trying to psych himself up to do something. So yes, he searched for this video, but like if he didn't find it, do you think that would have stopped the horrific acts that he did? Would he have searched for it somewhere else? Would he have searched for a different video? If he was just sort of trying to psych himself up, I think the argument, if he had just come across it and then that made him go do something, like that feels a little different. Like if that inspired him to do it. But the fact that he searched for it meant he knew about it. He was thinking about it already. And he was already just sort of in that mindset. So I'm not sure that actually makes the argument that you're saying it makes.
Yeah. I think it wasn't available anywhere else is the point. So we don't...
Really? I don't believe that. Like, it may have not been available on any major platform, but I'm sure there were other places that you could go to find it. Yeah. This stuff doesn't disappear, right? You can still find that stuff. And maybe it's a little bit harder, and maybe that sort of friction limits the reach of it. Sure, I'll buy that, and maybe that's good. But, if you have somebody who is determined, and in this case, it feels like he was probably determined, he was going to find that video.
Yeah. I definitely think the friction comes into it, and I don't know what the perfect amount of friction is. But a point that kind of, I guess, backs up what you're saying is actually something, again, that was mentioned very briefly in the conversation with the ex-staff member, was one of the other things that they believe led to the attack, or that Rudakabana accessed in advance of committing this atrocity, was an academic paper that published the full extent of the jihadist kind of creed or like manual. And I don't imagine that academic or wherever that paper is published being kind of invited to talk at the testimony about why was that why was that handbook including that academic paper. And so there is this, I appreciate and I acknowledge the kind of slight change, the slight difference in approach there, where we go firmly in on platforms where we state that they have a greater responsibility maybe than others. I still think that she was a little bit unhelpful and didn't necessarily engage with the idea that this was a violent act in the eyes of the majority of people.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is, like, X itself and Elon Musk and the team that works for him are disingenuous. So that is part of it. And I would actually bring that into the next story that we have here, which is that Sky News put out this amazing report where they were sort of curious about what sorts of things the algorithm on X feeds you. And so they set up a bunch of accounts, some of which they set up to follow left-wing users, some of which they've set up to follow right-wing, some of which they set up to follow, non-political users, and then just tracked for a long time with a lot of data. And it's fairly incredible. And it's a really nicely done article with really great artwork and infographic kind of stuff. But just a really quick summary is that when they did this, if you had a left-wing user that only followed left-wing users, the algorithm fed them an equal amount of left-wing and right-wing content, even though they only followed left-wing users.
Wow.
Okay, so you're like, okay, that's showing 50-50, that's cool. But then when they did the ones who were right-wing and only followed right-wing users, then they only saw 14% left-wing content. So it's basically almost all right-wing content. And then they had the neutral users who followed neither left or right-wing political partisan users, and they saw it was like twice as much right-wing content, so like 67% right-wing content and only 33% left-wing content.
Wow, okay.
And they said that barely any of the political content shown was nonpartisan at all. So basically, it's really pushing a partisan message. And right now, they're and Elon in particular is heavily involved in UK politics and trying to push certain messaging. Yeah. So it's pretty incredible, and they're pretty disingenuous. And the whole idea that this is all supporting free speech is kind of nuts. And you also sent me, Elon Musk went on the All In podcast. And so I, against my better instincts, watched some of that and watched the sections where he was talking about how he's brought free speech back and how any kind of algorithmic bias is a huge problem. And the idiots on that podcast were cheering him on about how he saved the world from woke and all this stuff, without any inkling or any recognition that they have gone in the extreme other direction. And they are free to do so. As I've always said, like, the editorial discretion, they are free to do so. But the claim that they have somehow fixed things and gone neutral is just utter nonsense. And so I think you have to keep that context in mind when you look at some engagement in what's happening in the UK in this particular inquiry.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a nuance to it, as always. What would our instrument for nuance be, Mike?
Oh God, the accordion of nuance.
Yeah, probably make quite a kind of sad soft sound. To go along with the trade-off tuba. I think there's definitely nuance to this. I felt that some parts of the testimony were really interesting, and again, I think it's a great topic. We'll probably return to this in the future as the inquiry wraps up and as we find out more about what Twitter/X do now that they're being supervised by the Online Safety Act. We'll move on now, Mike, from that to talk a bit about a couple of other stories in brief terms, as briefest as we can be. Let's start with a story that you picked up about Archive and about the kind of AI slop that's not only filling our workplaces now, but also academic journals of note.
Yeah. So Archive, it's ARXIV, which is impossible to, but it's pronounced Archive. It's put together by my alma mater, Cornell University, as a place for preprint journal articles to be posted. And preprint journal articles are actually really important to scientific research because most of the things, once they've gone through peer review, go behind paywalls, and they're very expensive unless you're at an academic institution, or even if you're at an academic institution in some cases. So various preprint servers like Archive have been really, really important. And they claim not changed their rules, but started enforcing the rules that they had not been enforcing before because they were getting overwhelmed with AI slop. And so in particular, they limited a specific type of article, a review paper in the computer science field, which they had said was never the kind of paper that they had rules against that originally. And they said, but there were like so few of them that had been submitted that they sort of let it through. But now it's just being flooded, and clearly with just absolute nonsense that is purely ChatGPT generated or whatever. And it was becoming too much for their moderation team to deal with. So they have now said, unless you can show that this paper is being presented at an academic conference or is being reviewed by an actual journal, you can't put it up there. So they put, some additional rules. They said, we're just enforcing the rules that we had before. But the thing that struck me about it is we're talking about, the rise of AI and how that's changing and challenging content moderation. But everybody always thinks about like social media. And here we're having it in an academic journal hosting service, which just shows once again, like how trust and safety and content moderation is everywhere and needs to be. And also kind of like, I will go back very briefly to the last story. In that All In podcast, Elon Musk totally mocks the idea of trust and safety. And like the idea that anyone should ever have trust in their title is the dumbest thing ever. And it's all just censorship. And like, no, it's not. And this is a case where it's like you have rules and you need somebody to enforce the rules. And at some point, you might let some stuff go through, but Archive is not there to be a platform for just AI generated slop, right? They want to be a place where you can find good, useful academic research that are preprints before they've done peer review. And they got overwhelmed and it made a mess and it made it hard to do things. So they start enforcing the rules and that builds trust. And so, yes, you need trust and safety people. Like that's part of the process. And yes, it's okay for them to have trust in their title because that's what they're building. And so this was like, it's a smaller example, but I always love the non-major platform stories because I think they're important to sort of get people to recognize like these things actually do matter and they matter not just for the biggest platforms.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and so good news for your preprints about labor relations, Mike, that you will no doubt... I'm not going to go into that. You have to listen to last week's podcast to know what that reference is about. We will kind of round up on a duo of stories, Mike, that are about France and about how kind of French authorities are cracking down on a couple of different platforms.
On everything.
Yeah. And what I think is a kind of sign about how the country is thinking about its relationship with big tech. There have been a couple of stories recently. Politico wrote one about how it's kind of differing from its bigger European neighbors, including Germany, about how it relates to these big tech platforms. Germany is thinking kind of more pragmatically about it and the kind of ongoing diplomatic tensions that we have talked about on the podcast, whereas France has been quite gung-ho in terms of kind of pushing back against some of how the platforms work and what they do. And one of the stories that I found, you got another, but one of the stories I found was about an investigation that's being opened into TikTok following a government committee report that suggested users were at risk of suicide as a result of its algorithm. So there is now this kind of broader investigation that's being opened about TikTok's algorithm and compliance with national laws, particularly around suicide. Probably more fascinating and certainly more public was the story you saw about Shein, the Chinese platform as well.
Yeah, and Shein, it's like the fashion retailer, very, very cheap, fast fashion copy stuff. And so they opened a store in Paris, which I think like an actual physical store, which I think got a lot of attention. And then at the very same time, the French authorities got really mad because they claimed that there was people found on Shein's marketplace where other people can sell stuff, sex dolls. And apparently they were small and therefore potentially implied child, which is bad. Like, obviously bad. And so France is threatening to ban Shein entirely. And Shein, I think, said they were shutting down their marketplace feature in France in response to this. And again, it's another example of like an alternative platform, and people will do bad stuff and break the rules on these platforms. And managing that and handling the trust and safety and content moderation aspect of it is really difficult. I'm sure there's a ton of material on there, and the ability to catch something like this is probably difficult. I don't know exactly what their particular rules are and how this fits. Obviously, when you're selling stuff that's a marketplace kinds of things is a different sort of challenge than just like social media content. All of these are different kinds of challenges, but there's always some effort in managing the marketplace and dealing with bad sellers or problematic sellers and who violate the rules. And I find it a little bit convenient and a little bit, yes, like a bad seller slipped through with a bad product. That happens all the time, and immediately jumping to, we're going to ban you. It felt sort of performative in a way that France can be performative about the internet. And, to me, part of it's also just like France, you said, like, yeah, they're taking a different approach to Germany. they've always done this. Like, I remember the fights over copyright stuff where France was always the worst on this stuff too.
Right.
And just there's some sort of like, I don't know if it because they had the Minitel before the internet became big, that they just have this like, this is a little bit of stereotyping, but there's a bunch of people in France who seem to really hate the internet and are really, really quick to attack the internet. And,
Right.
and, you know, within the political class, it's amazing to me how often France is just doing something bad.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't kind of known that backstory, that history. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bad time to be a kind of Chinese-owned platform in France. You know, not only are Shein and TikTok being investigated, but Temu, Wish, and AliExpress are also being investigated under the kind of marketplace investigation that you talked about. So yeah, we'll probably keep track of that as we go into next year, which will be fascinating. Mike, it's a bad time to be a Chinese platform in France. It's a good time to be a listener of Ctrl-Alt-Speech, because we will now go to our bonus chat with Thorn's Payless Halai, talking about how platforms are scaling their CSAM detection using Safer's new text classifier, which helps trust and safety teams find conversations that actually violate child sexual abuse policies. I found this a really fascinating chat. I didn't realize that it was possible to actually detect kind of in words the kinds of behaviors and interactions that might lead to a grooming and exploitation event. So really glad to have Payless on the podcast this week. So welcome, Payless, to the podcast. It's great to have you here on Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Really nice to see you. Let's dive straight into what is a really fascinating topic. Many folks working in the industry will know about Thorn, in part due to its Safer CSAM detection tool, which more than 90 platforms use day in, day out. Can you share a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how it helps platforms address the challenge of moderating CSAM at scale, and what sets it apart from other tools?
Yeah, of course. And thanks for having me on, Ben. Big fan of the show and the newsletter. So really glad to chat to you today. So as you mentioned, Safer is a scalable solution for companies to use to identify and remove CSAM at scale. We have both large and small companies using it. So, thinking a 2-person team running thousands of pieces of content a month, to like a 100-person team running billions of pieces of content a month. It works just as well at either end of the spectrum. So it's a really, really good tool as a starting point, but also as, a really robust solution for identifying and removing CSAM. I'd say the core of the product is really in its known CSAM detection. So that's going to be via the hash matching service, and also our classifier models. So these are machine learning models that are going to help companies identify previously unknown or novel CSAM. That's really the core offering, right? In our opinion, it's not enough to just look for one or the other. You really need to be looking for both to ensure you're running a safe platform and to keep the viral spread of CSAM down to a minimum. Beyond that, I think in terms of what sets it apart, first of all, at Thorn, this is all we do. We are narrowly focused on the issue of child sexual exploitation and child sexual abuse. So that really sets us apart, I think, first and foremost, as an organization. As a tool, I think it's a very unique tool in that so much of what we build is informed by our in-house research team. How many companies can say that they have a world-class research team in-house? So we kind of take the trends that they're seeing and, marry them with some kind of broader industry trends that we're seeing in the space. And we really try and develop tools that meet the moment of how children are being abused today and how they might be abused in different surfaces in the future as well. So an example of this in practice is, as part of our online grooming research, we've seen a pattern of perpetrators moving kids to private chats since as early as 2022, and we know probably before that. So we found in that research around 2 in 3 minors reported experiences of online contacts inviting them to move from a public chat to a private conversation on a different platform. And we know for various reasons, this is where the bulk of grooming happens, on these platforms where it's kind of a black box. So taking these insights from our research team, that really helped inform the build of Safer's latest classifier, which is the text classifier. And this differs slightly from our image and video in that it's text, and it enables users to identify sexually exploitative conversations, whether it's in strings of text or in conversations. And I just got an update this morning, so this might be breaking news, but we've just added a grooming label to the text classifier. So
Wow.
Again, this was entirely informed by user research, our in-house research team, and trends that we're seeing, in terms of growing harm types. Grooming is top of mind for a lot of trust and safety teams. So the idea with this new label is that it helps identify grooming patterns in conversations. So I'm thinking planning or suggesting offline meetings, encouraging self-harm or emotional dependency, and things of that nature. So I think really a combination of us, Thorn, as an organization being so narrowly focused on this issue space, in combination with our in-house research team that's deeply, deeply embedded within our product roadmap, really makes Safer such a unique and powerful product, in this space.
Yeah, really interesting and amazing that there's, such iterative development happening literally as we speak. Always good to have the latest breaking news on Ctrl-Alt-Speech. You mentioned about the kind of scale payloads of child sexual abuse material. That can be kind of daunting for, not only users, but trust and safety teams as well. It doesn't take a lot of looking at media headlines to see cases every week of grooming and exploitation. Can you kind of share a bit about what maybe gives you hope for the future and where you see the most meaningful progress happening with this harm?
Yeah, I get asked this question quite a lot, actually, especially, working at an organization like Thorn. You're kind of exposed to the worst of the worst. And you're right. Every day there's a new article, a new harm type, and it just seems like you're swimming upstream all the time, right? So for me, I think the first thing that comes to mind is really the people, whether it's people at Thorn who have dedicated their time to work solely on this issue of child sexual abuse and exploitation, or, the companies that we work with. I'm fortunate to work with a lot of trust and safety teams in industry, and seeing the people that are dedicated to their jobs and how they approach their day-to-day gives you nothing but hope. But then, you go to somewhere like TrustCon. You guys are normally kind of the curtain call at TrustCon with the live version of this podcast. Every year, the space seems to grow, right? Like more and more people want to come and join this space, like no matter how hard the issue is. And that's really hopeful. And thinking beyond the people, I think just innovative solutions. I mentioned the text classifier, I mentioned the grooming label. These innovative solutions really make the biggest dent. You can have all the people working on the issue as you want, but without innovation, without leading edge technology like classifiers and machine learning models, we really can't solve this problem. So I think, a combination of great people in the space, inspiring people, and innovation really, really makes me feel hopeful. And even zooming out like a few years and thinking about where Thorn started in launching Safer, since then we've launched proprietary hashing algorithm, proprietary classifiers, as I mentioned, the grooming label. We've done a lot of work just in the last few years, and it's really amazing to see that actually making a difference in the ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely a topic that has got a lot of people's attention and focus right now, and it's obviously great that Thorn is one of those organizations, as well as developing this kind of detection tools and technology that you mentioned. Thorn also talks a lot about the concept of safety by design. Can you talk a bit about what that means to you at Thorn, and what are the biggest opportunities you see in embedding safety by design approach into particularly emerging AI systems?
Yeah, I think it's a very complex subject, especially in the day and age where everyone's adding the words ethical or responsible to their development. But I think, and we at Thorn really just think, that safety by design means baking safety into every stage of AI development, or really any product development for that matter. So in practice, that starts with inputs. So cleaning up your training data. We've heard many stories over the last couple of years where there's kind of tarnished training data that then enables the model to spit out even worse generated content. So it starts with clean training data, and Safer can be a really big help with this as well. We have companies that have used Safer and are today using Safer to clean up training data to ensure that they're using the cleanest training data sets. Beyond the inputs, you can think about red teaming. So it's another thing that companies should be looking at, and also something that Thorn offers as a service. And this can be, us testing the model for harms, offering solutions in order to mitigate those harms. So it's really at every stage. It's not a set and forget it type of initiative. You want to really be aware of model drift, etc. So every stage, we want to be thinking about safety. And thinking of this like from an operational perspective, it's just a lot easier to be preventative rather than reactive. We've seen kind of companies trying to kind of put the genie back in the bottle, and it's really, really difficult and almost impossible. So if you focus on ensuring that the model can't produce those harms in the first place, you're going to have a much easier time preventing the outputs in being harmful. So I think that's kind of how we think about safety by design, and it's something that we really believe in, but we also practice at Thorn as well. In terms of opportunities, I think there's a real chance for companies to differentiate themselves, in my opinion. You go onto Google and type in AI model or chatbot. There are dozens and dozens of options now. And I truly believe, and I really hope that users will vote with their money, right? They'll go and choose the model that is safe for them, for their company, for their kids to use. So I think there's a real opportunity for companies to really lean into safety by design principles and build a really safe and responsible model that users are going to want to keep using, and users aren't going to be put off by producing adverse material as outputs.
Yeah, I certainly hope that too. I mean, more safety, more AI companies focusing on safety is not a bad thing. And it's great to see Thorn kind of contributing to that space in the active way that it is. When you kind of fast forward a few years, Pelez, when you think about Thorn's impact in the future in the context of AI and content moderation, what do you think that looks like in kind of real terms? Do you ever envisage a world in which AI is used to kind of defend and not endanger kids in the way that it often is nowadays?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I would say that AI is being used and has been used now for a long time to mitigate these harms. So, for example, I mentioned Safer was launched around 5 years ago, coming on 6 years now, and we've had our image and video classifier for almost as long, and that's AI, right? AI takes on such a different meaning now with LLMs and chatbots, but we are firm believers in embracing the fact that whenever there is a new technology and a new development, whether it's being able to stream high quality videos and share high quality videos to AI generated CSAM, these technologies are always going to be used for bad because the technology is agnostic, but there are always bad actors trying to exploit any angle. So we embrace that at Thorn, and we try to lean into that and try and build solutions using the same technology. And as I mentioned, the image and video classifiers that we have, machine learning models that are able to predict whether this is previously unknown CSAM or not. The latest product from Safer, the text classifier, is a language model that's able to detect sexually exploitative and abusive behavior, including grooming within text. So it's really, really about, I think, understanding that tech is going to be used for bad. And it's our job to try and stay ahead of that curve and address it in the best way possible. So I think the moral really is to embrace that it's always going to be used for bad. That's never going to cease to be the case. We're there to ensure that the technology is there to be used for good and to defend kids.
Brilliant. A good note to end on, I'd say. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us today about the works Thorn's doing, to give us a bit of context of your approach and a bit of a look under the hood as to how you're thinking about CSAM and preventing it at scale. So appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you for the time.
Thanks for listening to Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Subscribe now to get our weekly episodes as soon as they're released. If you your company or organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us by visiting Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. That's Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com.